My name is Corey Tiffany. I'm 36 years old, and I found out my own sister hated me by reading a place card at her own wedding. The Boston Harbor Hotel Grand Ballroom was full of crystal light, 280 guests in cocktail dresses and pressed suits. Calligraphy on cream cardstock at every place setting. My sister Lauren in Vera Wang, floating between tables. My husband Daniel one step behind me, carrying a slim leather portfolio I hadn't asked about. I walked to table 18, pulled out my chair, looked down. The card read, Corey Tiffany. Poor, ugly, and uneducated sister living off her sister. Caroline Ashford, the groom's mother, caught her own laugh in a napkin. A woman at the next table covered her mouth. 3 men at the head table, Old Boston, Old Money, raised their glasses. I didn't cry, didn't run, didn't sit. Daniel stood up. What none of them knew, including my own sister, was who my husband actually was. If this story is already hitting you in the chest, please take a second to like and subscribe so I know to keep telling it, and drop your location and local time in the comments below. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from right now. I'm Corey. This is the story of how I raised my sister for 15 years, how she repaid me on her wedding day, and how my husband, a man who had kept one quiet secret our entire marriage, answered for me. We have to go back to 2009, to a courtroom in Lowell, Massachusetts. But first, you need to know who I was 4 weeks before that ballroom. In February of this year, my life was small and quiet, and I liked it that way. I'd wake at 6 in our townhouse in Back Bay. Daniel was usually already up, reading at the kitchen island in a gray Henley and jeans, hair still wet from the shower. He'd pour me a coffee before I asked for it. He always did. He'd say good morning the same way every day, like he was relieved I was still there. I'd take the tea to Lowell. 43 minutes each way. I'd been making that commute since before Daniel, before money, before any of it. Hartman and Reeves Law sat on a side street near the canals. Small firm, 6 attorneys, 2 paralegals, me. I'd been there 12 years. Maggie Hartman, the senior partner, was 61 years old, divorced twice, no kids of her own. She drank her coffee black and called me sweetheart, and once, when I had pneumonia, drove out to my apartment in Lowell with chicken soup and a phone charger. Maggie was the closest thing to a mother I'd had since I was 19. The work was steady. Filing motions, scheduling hearings, drafting client letters. I liked the order of it. I liked the way Maggie trusted me. I liked that nobody at the firm cared what I wore, or what I drove, or where I lived. They knew my husband was in finance. They didn't know more than that. I'd never offered. I met Daniel in October 2019 at a cafe on Berkeley Street near the law firm I was temping at before Hartman and Reeves. I was reading East of Eden on my lunch break. He was at the next table with a laptop and a half-eaten muffin. He asked what page I was on. I said 312. He said that was the best part. We talked about Steinbeck for 40 minutes. He didn't ask what I did. I didn't ask what he did. When we started dating, he said one thing about his work. I run a small investment fund. That was it. I asked once if he was happy with it. He said yes, mostly. I never asked again. We married in September 2020 at the Lowell courthouse. 8 people came. Maggie was my witness. Daniel's witness was a man named Caleb who flew in from Greenwich. Said almost nothing the whole day, hugged me hard before he left, and said, "Take care of him. He needs it more than he lets on." I didn't understand that sentence for 2 more years. In May of 2022, I was scrolling on my phone in bed when I came across a Forbes article, Whitmore Capital, private equity, $4.2 billion under management. The CEO was a man named Daniel Whitmore, age 35 at the time, Greenwich, Connecticut, declined to be photographed for the piece. I sat up. I read it 3 times. I went downstairs. Daniel was at the kitchen island. I said, "Daniel." He said, "I was going to tell you. I should have told you already. I'm sorry." I said, $4.2 billion. He said, "I didn't want it to change us. It hasn't." Has it? I sat down across from him. I said, "Why did you let me think you ran a small fund?" He said, "Because I wanted someone to love me before they knew. And then you did. And then I didn't know how to start the conversation that would end the only honest thing I'd ever had." We moved to Back Bay 3 months later. Daniel still wore the same Henleys, still drove a 6-year-old Subaru, still got his hair cut at a barber on Mass Avenue for $40. The only thing that changed was the townhouse, and even that he kept quiet. No art on the walls except photographs I'd taken of Lauren as a kid. My sister Lauren was 25 last month. She'd graduated from Boston College 2 years late, switched majors 3 times, landed on marketing. She had 38,000 followers on Instagram and called herself a lifestyle influencer. She earned almost no money from it. I'd been sending her $2,200 a month since 2022. She thanked me sometimes. Mostly she didn't. In June of 2024, she met Tyler Ashford at a company event. Tyler was 27, a vice president at Ashford Construction Group, his grandfather's company, founded in 1971. By Christmas, they were serious. By July of 2025, they were engaged. The wedding was set for March 14th, 2026, 6 weeks ago, when the story actually starts. Lauren had not asked me to be in the wedding party. She said the bridesmaids were all college friends and Tyler's 2 cousins. She said I was the matron of honor, but only in name. No toast, no walking down the aisle, no role at the rehearsal dinner. She said his mother was particular about presentation. I said, okay. The week before the engagement party in July 2025, Lauren called me. She said, "Corey, Tyler's mother doesn't really do extended family at the engagement. It's a Caroline thing. I told her you'd understand. You always understand, right?" I said, "I always understand." I didn't go. One night in February, Daniel and I were having dinner. He'd made roast chicken. He set down his fork. He said, "Honey, has Lauren said anything about Tyler's father's business?" I said no. He looked at me for a long second. He said, "Okay." He didn't ask again. I didn't push. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a lot of things that month. That weekend, I went to Macy's and bought a navy dress for the wedding. $340, modest neckline, knee length. The saleswoman said I looked classic. I thanked her. I drove home with it folded in tissue on the passenger seat. I cried a little in the parking lot before I started the car. I wasn't sure why. I should have been. In June of 2009, my parents were killed on Interstate 95. It was a Wednesday night. They were driving home from Lauren's 3rd-grade end-of-year concert. Lauren had played a recorder. She'd been the second-to-last kid in the line. My mother had filmed it on her phone. My father had clapped too loud. It was raining. An 18-wheeler jackknifed in the middle lane near the Attleboro exit. My parents' Camry was directly behind it. They did not survive the impact. I was 19. A sophomore at UMass Lowell, studying English education, planning to be a high school teacher because my own 9th-grade English teacher had once told me I noticed things other people missed. I was in my dorm room when the phone rang. The dorm phone, not my cell. That's how I knew it was bad. Nobody calls the dorm phone unless they don't have your other number. It was 11:32 at night. State Police, Massachusetts. The trooper's voice was very kind. He asked if I was Corey Tiffany. He asked if Robert and Margaret Tiffany were my parents. He said there'd been an accident. I do not remember the next 4 hours clearly. I remember the drive. I remember walking into the hospital. I remember the social worker meeting me in the hallway. I remember being asked to identify them. I remember my father's coat sleeve. Gray wool, frayed at the cuff, because he'd refused to buy a new winter coat for 3 years. Lauren was at our cousin's house in Tewksbury. She'd been picked up after the concert because my parents had a couple of things to do on the way home. She was 8 years old. She was wearing pajamas with snowflakes on them when I picked her up at 4 in the morning. She said, "Where's Mommy?" I said, "Lauren, I have to tell you something." We sat on the cousin's living room floor and I told her. I held her while she cried. I told her I would not leave. I told her I would not let anyone take her. I told her she was going to be okay because I was going to make sure of it. I didn't know how I was going to make sure of it. The next 8 weeks were a courtroom and a lawyer and a funeral and a phone call from my Aunt Janet, my mother's older sister. Aunt Janet drove down from New Hampshire. She sat at my parents' kitchen table. She said, "Corey, I've talked to Mike. We're willing to take Lauren." I said, "Take her where?" She said, "Home with us. She'd have stability. She'd have a normal childhood. You're 19. You don't get to be 19 if you keep her. Think about that." I said, "What about me?" She said, "What about you? You're an adult. You'll figure out your life. We'd take Lauren. Just Lauren. Not the baggage." The baggage was a small life insurance payout my parents had left. $40,000 total, after the mortgage paid off and the funeral expenses settled. I had planned to put 35 of it into a trust for Lauren's education. Aunt Janet wanted that money to come with Lauren to New Hampshire. I knew, watching her face, that the money would not stay in a trust for Lauren if she took it. I said, "No." Aunt Janet said, "You'll ruin both your lives." I said, "I might, but I'd rather ruin them together than apart." The guardianship hearing was in August. The judge was a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain. She looked at me a long time. She said, "Miss Tiffany, you understand this means you don't get to be 19. I said, "Your Honor, I haven't been since Tuesday." She granted me sole guardianship. I dropped out of UMass Lowell 3 days later. My English education professor, Dr. Halloran, called me when she heard. She said one sentence I have never forgotten. She said, "Some of us never get back to the thing we were meant to do. Make sure it's worth it." I said I would. The first apartment Lauren and I lived in was a 1-bedroom on Westford Street in Lowell, above a dry cleaner. The radiator banged. The bathtub had a permanent rust stain. The rent was $980 a month, all I could afford. I worked 3 jobs: daytime cashier at Stop and Shop, evening janitor for an office building near the canals. Maggie Hartman's firm was actually one of my mop accounts, though I never saw her then. Weekend waitress at a 24-hour diner on Pawtucket Boulevard. I slept maybe 5 hours a night for 2 years. Lauren had nightmares for the first year. She'd come into my bed in the middle of the night and put her cold feet on my legs. She'd ask if I was going to die too. I'd say no. She'd say promise. I'd say I promise. I made promises I couldn't keep. I made them anyway. The first time I cried about my parents was 14 months after they died. Alone in the laundromat at 11 at night, watching her snowflake pajamas tumble in the dryer because she'd outgrown them, but I hadn't been able to throw them away yet. I sat on the orange plastic chair and cried for 35 minutes, and then I went home and read her Charlotte's Web because that's what we'd been reading every night for 6 months, and I wasn't going to let her down on chapter 11. She asked me one night, very small voice, "What happens when Charlotte dies?" I said, "Wilbur remembers her." She said, "Will you remember Mommy and Daddy?" I said, "Yes. And I'll remember them out loud, so you do too." I made a promise to those 2 children, the one upstairs sleeping, and the one I was becoming. I'd be the mother neither of us had anymore. I kept that promise. I just didn't know one of those children would grow up and try to write me out of the story I'd built her. The years moved in chapters I could only see clearly looking back. When Lauren was 12, her 6th grade teacher asked the class to write about their mothers for Mother's Day. Lauren wrote about me. She brought it home and read it out loud at dinner. The teacher had called her in the next day to make sure she understood the assignment. Lauren had told the teacher, "Corey is my mother. She just doesn't know it yet." I cried in the car after dropping her off. I cried because I had wanted to be enough for her, and that day I knew, briefly, that I had been. When Lauren was 16, she went through a stretch where she was embarrassed by our apartment. We'd moved by then, a 2-bedroom in a slightly better building. I was working as an admin assistant by then, at Maggie's firm. My income was almost livable. We had cable. We had 2 bedrooms. But Lauren had started spending weekends at a friend's house in Andover, whose parents owned a finished basement and a swimming pool. She'd come home and look at our living room like it was disappointing her. She stopped inviting friends over. One Saturday morning, she said, "Do we have to keep the couch in the front room? It looks like nobody loves us." I said, "We love each other. The couch knows." She rolled her eyes. When Lauren was 18, she got into Boston College. I paid the first year in cash, $24,000 from the Tiffany Education Trust. I'd opened the trust in 2011. I'd been putting $400 to $600 a month into it for 7 years by then. The night I sent the wire transfer to BC, I sat at our kitchen table for a long time, looking at the receipt. I had not finished college. I was sending her. She hugged me when she got the acceptance letter. She said, "Corey, you did this." I said, "You did this. I just opened the doors." When Lauren was 21, she'd switched her major 3 times and was a semester behind in credits. She told me she wanted to drop out and become a social media manager. I said, "Okay." She said she also needed somewhere to live and some money to live on while she built her brand. I said, "Okay." I started sending her $2,200 a month. I told myself that's what mothers do. I told myself it was an investment. I should have made her finish. I didn't know how to make a 21-year-old do anything she didn't want to do. In June of 2024, she met Tyler at a charity event for the Boys and Girls Club of Boston. Ashford Construction was a sponsor. Lauren had snuck in with a friend whose father was on the board. She came home that night and told me about Tyler's smile and his last name. I'd never heard of the Ashfords. I should have looked them up. I didn't. By August, she was sleeping in Brookline most nights. By Christmas, she was wearing a Cartier love bracelet I had not bought her. By February of 2025, Tyler had introduced her to his mother. Caroline Ashford had been a debutante in 1986. Her father had owned a regional chain of dry cleaners that he'd sold to a national company in the early 90s for what was, in those days, real money. Caroline had married up. Robert Ashford's family had been building in Massachusetts since 1971. Walter Ashford had started Ashford Construction with his brother and a single dump truck in Newton. 3 generations now. Real names in the city. The kind of family that gets invited to the mayor's office at Christmas. Caroline had 3 social rules. The first was that everyone in her circle came from somewhere. The second was that wherever you came from had to be presentable, and if it wasn't, you didn't talk about it. The third was that anyone who broke rules 1 or 2 never got a second invitation. Lauren broke rule 1 on day 1. Caroline made her a project. In November 2024, Lauren brought Tyler to our Back Bay townhouse for dinner. Daniel made pasta. Tyler was polite. He asked Daniel about his work. Daniel said he ran an investment fund. Tyler asked which one. Daniel said, "A small private equity fund, mostly middle-market industrials." Tyler nodded and changed the subject. He was a Babson kid. Industrials weren't his world. After they left, Daniel did the dishes. He said, without looking up, "Lauren didn't introduce me as her brother-in-law. She introduced me as your husband. Did you notice?" I had noticed. Caroline did not visit. In March of 2025, Lauren came over alone one Sunday. She said Caroline had asked her to clean up some things about her background. Lauren said it carefully, like she was testing how much I'd absorb. She said, "Tyler's family is very old money. They don't quite understand our situation. I just need you to be quiet about how you raised me. Tonight, can we say our parents died and an aunt took us in?" Caroline was at the door. She added quickly. Caroline was downstairs. She'd come to see the family. I went down. Caroline was in the foyer in a long camel coat. She did not take it off. She shook my hand. She said, "Lauren has told me so much about you. You've been so generous." I said, "I'm her sister." Caroline smiled. "Of course. Of course." She stayed 8 minutes. She did not have coffee. She walked out, and Lauren followed her like a duckling. I sat on the stairs after they left. Daniel came down and sat next to me. He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "She just told her future mother-in-law I'm an aunt." Daniel said, "I heard." I said, "What do I do?" He said, "I think you do what you've always done. You wait. You watch. And when she's ready to call you her sister again, you answer the phone." I waited. I watched. The phone stayed quiet. I should have said something then. I should have asked Lauren what she'd done. But I'd spent 15 years not asking Lauren questions she didn't want to answer. I told myself it would be okay. It was the last time I would lie to myself. I want to pause here for a second. I know a lot of you are sitting with a moment like this in your own life, a person you raised or sacrificed for, or showed up for when no one else did, who decided one day you weren't quite the version of family they wanted on display anymore. If that's you, drop a single word in the comments. Stay or leave. Stay if you would have stayed quiet in that car. Leave if you would have made her pull over. I'm not asking because there's a right answer. I'm asking because I want you to know, wherever you fell, you're not alone in the falling. Now let me tell you about the 3 weeks before the wedding. Because that's when the floor started to crack under everything. 3 weeks before the wedding, I was at Lauren's apartment in Brighton helping her with stamps for Save the Dates. They were beautiful, actually. Cream linen cardstock, gold foil, Lauren and Tyler's names in a script so delicate it looked like a whisper. I licked envelopes. I asked her how the planning was going. She said it was going. While she was in the kitchen getting wine, I noticed a notepad on her dining table. Caroline's handwriting. I'd seen one Christmas card from her. The notepad said, at the top, "Seating, difficult guests." There was a list of names. Mine was on it. I closed the notepad. I never told Lauren I'd seen it. 2 weeks before the wedding, the bridal shower was held at the Lenox Hotel. Lauren had insisted I come. Caroline had insisted, apparently, that the shower be small and tasteful. 40 women in pearls drinking French 75s. Caroline introduced me to her circle as Lauren's caregiver. Lauren was raised by an aunt out near Lowell, you know, after the tragedy. I corrected her, quietly, in front of the women. I said, "I'm Lauren's sister. I raised her. There was no aunt." Caroline's smile tightened by a millimeter. She said, "Of course. Forgive me. I'm always getting the family details a little muddled." Lauren did not make eye contact with me for the rest of the afternoon. She did not come over when the women dispersed. She did not say goodbye when I left at 5. That night, Daniel asked how the shower went. I told him. He set down his coffee very carefully. He said, "Honey, do you want me to handle this?" I said, "No, she's still my sister." He looked at me a long time. He said, "Okay, but Corey, I want you to know, I'm here. Whatever you decide, whenever you decide it." 1 week before the wedding, Lauren called and asked for $8,000. She said it was for a last-minute photographer upgrade. The wedding photographer Caroline had originally booked had double booked her date, and the replacement was more expensive, and Caroline thought it would be easier if Lauren just covered the difference herself. I wrote the check. I wired the money the next morning. I did not know yet that Lauren had drained the Tiffany Education Trust. I did not know yet that the $8,000 wire was the only money I'd given her in the past 6 months that had actually come from me. Everything else, she'd been taking from the account I'd built her since 2011. 3 days before the wedding, Daniel made an unscheduled trip into Whitmore Capital's office on a Saturday afternoon. He almost never went in on weekends. I noticed. I didn't ask. He came home at 7 that night carrying a slim leather portfolio I had not seen before. He locked it in the safe in his closet. The only thing he said was, "Just in case." I didn't ask what it contained. I think part of me already knew that part of him was preparing for something I had not yet allowed myself to see. 2 days before the wedding, Tabitha Brennan called me. Tabitha was 23. She'd been Lauren's roommate junior year at BC, and she'd ended up in the bridal party because Lauren needed warm bodies in lavender. I'd met her twice. She had a quiet way of listening. She was studying social work at BU. She called at 8:15 on Thursday evening. She said she was just checking in to confirm what time we'd all be arriving at the hotel on Saturday. The call lasted maybe 90 seconds. But before she hung up, she said one thing in a voice that wasn't quite right. She said, "Corey, I just want to say, I think you're a really good sister. I hope Lauren knows that." She hung up. I sat in my kitchen for 10 minutes. I almost called her back. I didn't. I told myself it was bridal anxiety. I told myself a lot of things that week. I should have called Tabitha back. The next 48 hours would teach me that quiet women like Tabitha don't make accidental phone calls. They make warnings. Friday morning, March 13th, the day before the wedding, I was at my desk at Hartman and Reeves filing a motion when Maggie opened her office door. She said, "Corey, come in, close the door." She was standing behind her desk. She wasn't sitting. That was the first sign. There was a folder on her desk. Maggie put both hands flat on either side of it. She looked at me a long second. She said, "Sweetheart, I need to show you something. I wasn't going to. I told myself yesterday it wasn't my place. But I've known you 12 years and I cannot watch this happen without you knowing." I sat down. Maggie opened the folder. Inside were bank statements. Eastern Bank. Tiffany Education Trust. The account I had opened in 2011 as a custodial UTMA. The account I'd transferred to Lauren's full ownership when she turned 21 in 2022, though I'd kept depositing into it because I'd told myself, when she's ready, she'll know it's there. Maggie pointed at the first statement. October 2025, $30,000 withdrawal. November 2025, $42,000 withdrawal. December 2025, $35,000 withdrawal. January 2026, $28,000 withdrawal. February 2026, $45,000 withdrawal. Total withdrawn, $180,000. Remaining balance, $7,400. I read each line twice. I did not speak. Maggie said, "I pulled the records this morning. I'm still listed as alternate trustee from before she turned 21. I never took my name off it. I forgot it was still there." Eastern Bank flagged it as unusual activity and called me yesterday afternoon. They thought I'd want to know. I sat with it overnight, Corey. "I'm so sorry." I said. She had access. I gave her access. It's her money. Maggie said, "Legally, yes. Ethically, no, sweetheart. That money was for her education. You told her that every time you handed her a statement. She knew what it was. She emptied it for a dress." I said, "We don't know what she spent it on." Maggie pulled out a second sheet. She'd printed out a few of Lauren's recent Instagram posts. The Vera Wang, the Cartier, the Maldives confirmation Lauren had so cheerfully reposted. The Rolex Submariner Tyler had thanked her for in a story. I looked at the photos. I looked at the bank statements. I said, very quietly, "Okay." Maggie said, "There's one more thing. And I'm only telling you because I had a feeling, and I followed it. I had Paul pull public filings on Ashford Construction Group 2 weeks ago, Tyler's father's company, their 10K and their most recent quarterly disclosures." I waited. She said, "Corey, they're in a bad way. 3 seaport projects delayed past contract dates. Debt service coverage barely above 1. Credit facility refinanced 3 times in 18 months. There are covenants in their senior debt that are days from tripping. Somebody is going to come collecting. Somebody big. Maybe within weeks." I sat with that. I said, "Why are you telling me this part?" Maggie said, "Because Daniel has been quieter than usual lately. And the kind of fund that owns construction companies in this state, there aren't that many of them. I'm an old lawyer with a long memory. I might be wrong. But if I'm right, I think your husband knows things he hasn't told you." I drove home that afternoon. I sat in our kitchen in Back Bay with both hands flat on the marble island. I didn't cry. I didn't move. The afternoon light moved across the floor. Daniel came home at 6. He saw my face. He set down his briefcase. He came over and stood across from me. He said, "What is it?" I told him about the $180,000. His face did not change much. He listened to all of it. When I was done, he said, "Honey, I am so sorry." I said, "Daniel, I need to ask you something. Maggie said someone is about to call Ashford Construction's loan. Do you know anything about that?" The silence in our kitchen lasted maybe 9 seconds. I watched my husband, the man who had married me at the Lowell courthouse, who had hidden $4.2 billion from me for almost a year because he wanted to be loved before he was known, do the hardest thing he had ever done with me. He told the truth. He said, "Whitmore Capital owns 38% of Ashford Construction Group. We've held it for almost 3 years through a special purpose vehicle called Sterling Holdings LLC. The Ashfords don't know it's us. Robert Ashford signed a personal guarantee on a $52 million revolving credit facility to us in June of 2023. His house in Brookline, the Vineyard Haven property, and most of his personal assets are collateral. I have not decided what to do about any of this. I was hoping you'd never need me to decide." I sat with this. I said, "How long have you known Lauren was marrying Robert Ashford's son?" He said, "Since the engagement, July of last year." I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He said, "Because I wanted you to have this wedding without me hovering over it. Because if I told you who we were, you would have spent every minute trying not to let it bleed into Lauren's day. And because, Corey, I love you. And I was trying not to take this from you too." I sat with this longer. I said, "Are you going to be at the wedding tomorrow?" He said, "If you go, I go." I said, "I'm going." He said, "Okay." He didn't ask what I planned to do. He had watched me raise a child at 19 with 3 jobs and no help. He knew when to stand back. He knew, better than I did in that moment, what was coming. I went to bed at 11. I didn't sleep. At 8:32 on Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was Tabitha. She said, "Corey, I'm sorry to call this early. I've been up all night. I need to come over. Right now. There's something you have to see before you get to the hotel." I said, "Come." She arrived 20 minutes later. She was wearing her bridesmaid's lavender robe under a winter coat. Her makeup wasn't done. Her hands were shaking. She sat at our kitchen island. Daniel poured her coffee. He stayed in the doorway. He didn't intrude. Tabitha said, "I was added to a group chat in February. The bridal squad chat. Lauren added me because I was the one printing the place cards. She had me do them at a stationer in Coolidge Corner. She said it was cheaper than the hotel's calligrapher. She gave me a list. I printed 280 cards. I didn't read them. I just printed them. She handed me her phone. 2 nights ago, I saw a message from Caroline that didn't sit right. I scrolled back. I read every message in that chat from December until yesterday. Corey, I'm so sorry. I scrolled. Caroline Ashford, March 2nd, 9:14 p.m. Make sure Corey's place card has the line we discussed. We need the Whitfields to see what Lauren rose above. Lauren, March 2nd, 9:16 p.m. Done. Tabitha printed them yesterday. She doesn't know what they say. Caroline, February 17th, 11:03 p.m. Darling, I need you to commit to this. Half measures are how women like your sister end up at family Thanksgivings forever. We are doing this for your future. Lauren, February 17th, 11:08 p.m. I know. I just feel guilty sometimes. She did raise me. Caroline, that is the trap. Sentimental gratitude is how lower-class women keep their relatives close. Tyler's father and I rose by knowing when to close doors. I am closing this one for you. You will thank me by your 40th birthday. I scrolled further. There were references to the project, references to the seating moment, references to which of Caroline's friends to seat near table 18 for the reaction shot. A guest from the Whitfield family, old Boston, very old, had been promised a piece of theater at dinner. There were also messages from a woman named Diana Whitfield, 50-something, married to James Whitfield. Caroline, darling, I cannot wait for dinner Saturday. I'll bring my reading glasses. Tabitha was crying now. She said, I printed them, Corey. I printed every one. I didn't read them. She told me they were standard. I closed her phone. I handed it back to her. I said, Tabitha, listen to me. This is not your fault. You're the only person in that chain who told the truth. I hugged her. Tabitha said, Are you still going? I said, I'm going. She said, Why? I said, Because she's my sister, and because she needs to look me in the eye while she does it. If I don't go, she gets to live forever telling people I was the kind of woman who didn't show up. I'm going to show up. Daniel had been standing in the doorway. He stepped forward. He said, Tabitha, thank you. Will you be in the ballroom at 6? Tabitha nodded. Daniel said, Stay close to Corey tonight, whatever happens. Tabitha said she would. She drove back to Brighton to finish getting ready. She had not been a part of any of it. She had only been the printer. I sat on the kitchen stool a long time after she left. I didn't know yet what Daniel had in his briefcase. I didn't know what he'd brought from his office that Friday afternoon. I only knew this. My husband, who had spent 6 years asking me almost nothing, had finally been asked one question, and he had an answer ready. I got dressed at 4:30. The navy dress from Macy's. $340. A pair of low pumps I'd owned since 2018. A small gold chain my mother had given me for my high school graduation. I put my hair up the way I used to when I was waitressing at the diner. Low chignon. No flyaways. I looked in the mirror. I did not look like a poor sister. I did not look like an uneducated sister. I did not look like an ugly sister. I looked like a woman who had buried her parents at 19 and raised her sister into a woman who would write those words about her on cardstock. I looked like exactly what I was. Daniel came up behind me in the bedroom mirror. He was wearing a charcoal suit I had not seen before, single-breasted, quietly expensive. The kind of suit you only wear once or twice a year, when you need a room to know you mean what you're about to say. He said, You look beautiful, sweetheart. I said, What's in the portfolio? He said, What I needed at the office Friday: the limited partnership agreement, the ownership documents, the personal guarantee Robert signed, a letter my counsel drafted yesterday. I said, "What does the letter say?" He said, "It says that based on certain events, Whitmore Capital intends to exercise its rights under the credit agreement. It's not signed. It doesn't have to be tonight, but it's drafted. The decision is yours." I looked at my husband in the mirror behind me. I said, "It's not mine, it's ours." He said, "Tonight, sweetheart, it's yours." The drive from Back Bay to the Boston Harbor Hotel took 11 minutes. Daniel drove. I watched the harbor lights come on as the dusk settled. I felt my hands resting in my lap. They were not shaking. I had spent 15 years preparing to be the strong one for someone else. I had not prepared to be the strong one for myself. I'd find out tonight whether I knew how. The valet took the car. Caroline Ashford was standing inside the lobby greeting guests, in a champagne-colored gown with a fur stole that I think was a real fur. She saw us. She put on her best public face. She said, "Oh, Corey, sweetheart, you came, and this must be your husband." I said, "This is Daniel." Daniel extended his hand. He said, "Caroline, a pleasure." She shook his hand the way you shake a stranger's hand, briefly, efficiently. She did not introduce him to the woman she'd been talking to. She turned to me. She said, "Lauren is already in the bridal suite. She's almost ready. The ballroom opens at 5:30. Have a drink. Mingle." She floated off. Daniel and I stood in the lobby for a moment. He said, "You okay?" I said, "Yes." We went into the cocktail hour. 280 guests in evening wear. A string quartet playing Pachelbel. Trays of champagne moving through the room. Lauren in her Vera Wang at the center of it all, surrounded by a circle of women I didn't know. She saw me. She crossed the room. She kissed my cheek. She said, "I'm so glad you came." She did not introduce Daniel to anyone in her circle. She floated away. Tabitha appeared at my elbow. She squeezed my hand once, hard. She whispered, 6 o'clock. They're about to start seating people." The ballroom doors opened at 5:55. The guests began moving in. Round tables of 10. White linens. Tall floral arrangements of garden roses and ranunculus. The chandeliers lit. The string quartet shifted to a violin and cello piece I half recognized. Daniel walked one step behind me. He did not look at the place cards as we passed them. He looked at the room. He noted where Robert Ashford was sitting at the head table. The same head table as Walter Ashford, the 82-year-old founder. He noted the press photographer in the corner, Boston Magazine, social pages. He noted the exits. I walked toward the back of the room. Table 18 was against the wall, near the service doors, the farthest possible point from the head table. I reached my chair. I pulled it out. I looked down at the place card. Corey Tiffany, poor, ugly, and uneducated sister living off her sister. The card was set in elegant calligraphy, cream stock, gold edge, the same card the calligrapher had done for everyone, except that everyone else had only their name. Mine had an introduction. I did not sit. I did not speak. A woman at the next table, Diana Whitfield, mid-50s, married to one of Caroline's oldest friends, looked at my card, looked at her own, looked back, caught her own laugh in her napkin. 3 men at the head table, Caroline's circle, James Whitfield, and 2 others, raised their champagne glasses to Caroline. Caroline rose at the head table, lifting her own glass. She said in her loudest hostess voice, "Everyone, just a little family humor. Let's all take our seats. The bride is ready to make her entrance." A ripple of laughter at 3 tables, polite confusion at the others. Robert Ashford turned to look at me with mild curiosity, the way you might look at a small disturbance at a neighboring restaurant table. Walter Ashford, 82, white-haired, hands like worn leather, frowned. He did not laugh. He did not look at Caroline. He looked at the card in my hand from across the room. Then he looked at Caroline, then back at me. Lauren was across the ballroom near the bridal suite door. She saw me holding the card. She smiled, very slightly. She turned to a friend and said something. I stood there. Daniel stood up beside me. He didn't speak yet. He looked at Caroline, then at Robert, then at Lauren across the room. Then he turned and looked at me. He said, "Sweetheart, let me see that." I handed him the card. He read it. He folded it once. He put it in the breast pocket of his charcoal suit. He turned to face the room. His voice was conversational, not raised. The way you might address a meeting that had run a little long. He said, "Excuse me, I'd like to introduce myself. I haven't had the pleasure with most of you tonight. Caroline, brittle. Sir, we're about to start the dinner. Daniel. I'll be brief, Caroline. My name is Daniel Whitmore. I'm Corey's husband. I run an investment firm in Boston called Whitmore Capital." The room shifted in a way I had never seen a room shift before. Two men at a table near the front straightened in their chairs. One of them set down his glass. One of them pulled out his phone. A woman at the head table, older, gray-haired, married to a Boston banker, looked at her husband. Her husband had gone very still. Daniel said, "Robert, could you come over here for a moment, please?" Robert Ashford, who had been seated, stood up. He walked across the ballroom to where I was standing at table 18. He was sweating slightly at the temples. He had not put it together yet. He was still trying to. Daniel, low but audible to the nearest tables, said, "Robert, I think we have a meeting Tuesday morning about a credit facility. I wanted to put a face to the name, Sterling Holdings. That's us. I'm sorry to do this here. I didn't plan to, but your wife and my sister-in-law just made the biggest mistake of their lives." Robert said, "What? What are you saying?" Daniel said, "I'm saying my wife sat down at her sister's wedding and read a place card calling her poor, ugly, and uneducated. I'm saying I have watched her for 6 years be the kind of woman this room is not fit to clean up after. And I'm saying you have decisions to make in the next 72 hours about your company, your house in Brookline, and your home in Vineyard Haven, because the personal guarantee you signed in June of 2023 is about to become very personal." Caroline, from across the room, voice rising. Robert, what is he saying? What is happening?" Walter Ashford stood up slowly at the head table. He set down his napkin. He had not spoken yet. He looked at Caroline, then at Lauren in her white dress, then at the place card just visible in Daniel's breast pocket. Walter walked across the ballroom in a slow, deliberate line. The string quartet had stopped. 280 people were silent. The press photographer in the corner had lowered her camera instinctively, the way you do when you understand you should not be filming this. Walter reached our table. His voice, when he spoke, was gravel from 50 years of work sites. He said, "Son, may I see that card?" Daniel handed it to him. Walter read it. Then he read it again. He looked at Caroline. He looked at Robert. He looked at Lauren in her Vera Wang dress. He said, to his son, to his daughter-in-law, to the family he had built, "This is what we did at our family's wedding to a woman who raised a child alone? This is who we are now?" Carolyn opened her mouth. Walter raised one hand. She closed it. Walter turned to me. He said, "Ma'am, I owe you an apology on behalf of my family. I had no idea. I am ashamed." He turned to Daniel. He said, "Mr. Whitmore, I built this company in 1971 with my brother and a truck. My son and his wife have run it for 11 years. Whatever you decide to do Tuesday morning, I want you to know, I understand." Daniel nodded once. Daniel turned back to me. He held out his hand. He said, "We're leaving, sweetheart. But there's one more thing to say first." He turned to face Lauren, and for the first time all night, my sister looked afraid. Lauren stepped forward. Her face had gone white under her bridal makeup. She raised a hand, the hand with the engagement ring on it. She said, "Daniel, Corey, there's been a mistake with the cards. The printer made an error. The calligrapher. There was a confusion." Tabitha walked out from behind a column near the bar. She walked toward us in her lavender bridesmaid dress, holding her phone in front of her with both hands like she was carrying something fragile. She said, "I printed them, Lauren. You approved every single one. I have the proofs in my email. I have the texts where you and Caroline finalized them on March 2nd. She handed her phone to Walter Ashford. Walter took it. Walter read. His face changed in a way that I do not think the men who worked for him in 1971 would have recognized. Walter Ashford had not been surprised by much in his 82 years. He was surprised now. Caroline said, "This is absurd. Tabitha, you are not authorized to give that back." Caroline lunged for the phone. Walter held it out of her reach with one arm, the way a man who had handled rebar and dump trucks for 50 years could still hold off a woman in heels. Walter said to Caroline, in a voice nobody in that room argued with, "Sit down." Caroline sat down, on a chair that wasn't hers. A waiter quietly slid it under her. Daniel reached under the table where Tabitha had moved my chair. He pulled out the leather portfolio he had brought. He opened it. He took out a single sheet of paper. He handed it to Robert Ashford. He said, "This is the executed limited partnership agreement showing Whitmore Capital's ownership of Sterling Holdings, LLC, which holds 38% of Ashford Construction Group and one board seat. It's been in place since June of 2023. You signed your personal guarantee to us, Robert, not to a faceless fund. Tuesday morning we were scheduled to discuss accelerating the timeline. After what I have seen in this room tonight, we will be moving that meeting up." Robert read the document. He sat down on a chair that also wasn't his. A waiter helped him into it. I looked across the ballroom. I looked at Lauren. She was standing alone now in the middle of the dance floor. The bridesmaids had drifted backward. The friends had drifted backward. She was in her Vera Wang, holding her own bouquet because her wedding planner had set it on her chair an hour earlier, and she had picked it up at the wrong time. I said, "Lauren, look at me." She looked at me. I said, "When did you start telling them I was your aunt's caretaker? When did you start telling them our parents died and someone else took you in? When did I stop being your sister?" She said, "Corey, they wouldn't have." I said, "Was it before or after Caroline asked you to do it?" Lauren did not answer. Caroline said, "I never asked her to do anything." Tabitha held up the phone. She read aloud in her clear, quiet, social work student voice. "Make sure Corey's place card has the line we discussed. We need the Whitfields to see what Lauren rose above. Posted by Caroline Ashford in the bridal chat on March 2nd at 9:14 p.m. The room was silent. It was the longest 7 seconds of my life. Walter had both hands flat on the head table. Robert was staring at the floor. Caroline had stopped speaking. The press photographer had put her camera in her bag. Lauren broke first. She said, Corey, please. I didn't mean it the way it sounds. I didn't. Tyler doesn't know. Tyler, baby, this isn't what you think." Tyler had been standing behind her this whole time, 27 years old, in a tuxedo his mother had selected. He had not spoken once. He spoke now. He said, "Lauren, did you tell my parents your sister was just an aunt? Did you tell them she didn't raise you?" Lauren said, "Tyler." He said, "Did you?" She said, "I." He said, "Yes or no?" She said, "Yes." He nodded slowly. He took off the wedding band he had been wearing for the photographs they had taken at 4 p.m. He set it on the head table next to Walter's hand. He said, "I can't do this." He turned. He walked past Lauren in her dress. He walked past Caroline at the chair that wasn't hers. He walked past his father at the chair that wasn't his. He walked past Walter at the head table. He walked out of the ballroom and through the lobby and out the front doors of the Boston Harbor Hotel. He did not come back that night. Daniel turned to me. He held out his hand again. He said, "Are you ready, sweetheart?" I took his hand. I turned. Then, one more time, to my sister. I said, "Lauren, I was your sister for 15 years. I will not be your sister tomorrow. I will not take your calls. I will not open your letters. The trust account is empty. There's nothing left between us. I hope you find a way to live with what you became. I won't be watching." We walked across the ballroom toward the exit. We passed Tabitha at the corner near the bar. I squeezed her hand. I whispered, "Thank you." At the doors of the ballroom, I paused. I did not turn around. I spoke to the room and to my sister, and to no one in particular. I said, "My mother named me Corey. She named her Lauren. My mother would have been ashamed of one of us tonight. It wasn't me." We walked out. I want to say one thing before I finish the story, because I think a few of you need to hear it. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from raising someone who later decides you weren't worth what you gave. It does not feel like betrayal at first. It feels like confusion. Then it feels like loneliness. Then it feels like a quiet kind of nothing. And the people who tell you to forgive and reconcile have never been the ones who emptied themselves to fill someone else. Boundaries are not punishment. Sometimes they are the last act of love you have left to give, not to her, but to the 19-year-old you used to be, who deserves a sister who would have shown up for her. Now let me tell you what happened the next morning, because that's where this actually ends. Sunday morning, March 15th, 7:14 a.m. I sat at our kitchen island in Back Bay with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. My phone had been vibrating against the marble since just after 5. When I finally picked it up, I had 41 missed calls from Lauren, 18 from Caroline, 9 from numbers I did not recognize, 3 from Boston Globe business desk, 1 voicemail from a Worcester area code that turned out to be Walter Ashford. He had left a message at 6:50 a.m. His voice was tired and old. He said, "Ma'am, this is Walter Ashford. I owe you a longer apology than the one I gave you last night. Please call me whenever you are ready. I will not call you again. The next move is yours." Daniel came down at 7:30 in jeans and an old Henley. He made fresh coffee. He slid a folder across the island toward me. He said, "Maggie sent these over last night, for when you're ready." Inside the folder were the bank statements. Eastern Bank, Tiffany Education Trust, $180,000, withdrawn in 5 transactions across 5 months. I looked at the statements for a long time. I did not cry. I said, "Daniel." He said, "Yes, sweetheart." I said, "What are you going to do about Robert Ashford?" He said, "What do you want me to do?" I thought about Walter Ashford, the old man with sawdust in his name, the man who had built a company in 1971 with his brother and 1 truck, and had walked across a ballroom to apologize to me before I asked him to. I thought about Caroline, about the message she had sent at 9:14 p.m. on March 2nd, about the women she had invited specifically to laugh. I said, "Call the loan." Daniel nodded. He went into his study to make a phone call. I sat at the kitchen window. The morning fog was burning off the Charles River. The sun was hitting the brick of the building across the street. I watched a man walk his dog down Commonwealth Avenue. He did not know my name. He did not need to. 2 weeks later, Ashford Construction Group filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Walter Ashford retired publicly the same day, in a brief statement from a lawyer's office. He did not attend the press conference. Caroline and Robert Ashford listed the Brookline house in early May. It sold in 9 days. The Vineyard Haven house sold 3 weeks after that. Tyler Ashford moved to Seattle on April 2nd. He took a job at a smaller construction firm. He has not spoken publicly about the wedding. Lauren called me 41 times the first week, 19 times the second, 6 times the third, twice the fourth, and once a month for 2 months after that. Then she stopped. Tabitha Brennan finished her social work degree this May. She sent me a card when she graduated. I sent her a check toward her first year of student loans. She tried to refuse it. I made her keep it. Maggie Hartman still pours my coffee at the firm. She has not mentioned the wedding once. Daniel still wears the same gray Henleys, still drives the same Subaru, still cuts his hair at the barber on Mass Avenue for $40. He has not bought himself anything new since March. I am not angry anymore. I am something quieter than angry. I am done. My sister had a sister for 15 years. She just did not know what one was. I had a sister for 15 years, too. And then, one Saturday in March, I didn't. The hardest part of raising someone is knowing when you've raised them as far as they were willing to go. The second hardest part is letting yourself stop carrying them when they decided they were done being carried. I made a promise once, on a laundromat chair in Lowell, to 2 children. The one upstairs sleeping and the one I was becoming. I kept the promise to the second one, too. It just took me 36 years to know what keeping that promise meant. It meant walking out of a ballroom with my husband's hand in mine and not looking back. It meant turning off a phone that had not stopped ringing since 5 a.m. It meant making my own coffee in my own kitchen on a Sunday in March and watching the fog burn off a river I had earned the right to look at. It meant being, finally, the sister I had needed. The one who would have shown up.